So let's talk about damage skills. So a damage skill is just a skill that is good at dealing damage or inflicts some damage. So I would say there's like four main categories of skills. There's control or shutdown, which are skills that prevent enemies from doing things or just straight up disable enemies. Then there's also the damage skills, which are skills that deal damage. There's utility skills, which are skills that serve some kind of purpose or function outside of combat, damage, or control or healing. And then, of course, there are healing skills, which just simply, like damage skills, deal damage. Healing skills heal away damage or refill health bars. So every team comp needs good damage or good damage output. In the case of this build, this is obviously a damage-oriented build with some utility and control. The utility comes from ward against foes. The control comes from meteor knockdown and ward against foes snare. I also have an interrupt, which can't really be timed like a normal interrupt, but it can kind of interrupt things that are burning. And of course I have blind and cracked armor, the blind being like more control oriented because it prevents enemies from dealing damage. It prevents them from doing what they're trying to do. So Starburst is a perfect example of a damage skill. Like when you're evaluating skills and you're making builds, especially if you're doing what I'm doing, which is factions only Highlander, which means new account with only factions, and I'm running one of each profession. That's it. I also can use core skills because those are in factions technically. So in this situation, I have to make new builds. It's been really fun. I've had a great time doing it. I really enjoy it. But let's get back to like the damage. So Starburst is like, on paper, it's a damage skill. It does 105 fire damage, which is good. It inflicts burning, which is 14 damage a second. So it inflicts like 56 burning damage over 4 seconds. You gain 2 energy for each foe struck, and it also hits foes in the area. So hits foes in the area is a big deal, especially burning them all as well. Like that's a lot of damage for one skill on a 7-second cooldown, and it gives you energy. So like for example, I'm going to open with Lightning Touch, boost my damage. These have 60 armor, so it's not going to really boost against them, but alright, let's get out of this Ray of Judgment. Alright, so I probably should have targeted the Ellie, but we'll just target this Necro because it's almost dead. So this build's like whole purpose for existing is to deal damage. So I Shadow Step in and then I just DPS things with burst damage. That's all it does. It has some control, but doesn't have much control. Now let's compare this to my Mesmer's build, which has Psychic Instability, which is a lot of control, Cry of Frustration, a lot of control, Empathy, more of a damage skill, and then of course Minions, which are a form of control because enemies can get stuck on minions, and minions deal damage. So a lot of utility, not as much damage. In this case, the main damage skills I have are Lightning Touch for damage and cracked armor, which sets up for more damage against foes with over 60 armor. Starburst, big damage. Tanai's Wind, decent damage and interrupt on adjacent. Inferno, big damage on adjacent. Bed of Coals and Meteor, good damage over time and knockdown. You can open fights with this, and foes will take all the damage if you do it correctly. Meaning if you put Bed of Coals down and then Meteor them, assuming they're not moving around already. So every team comp needs damage, and it also needs everything else. Like you need healing, you need mitigation, you need like utility and control. So in this situation, I have 2 other builds on my Ranger and Warrior that function as both damage and control. 2 nearby AoEs that deal roughly 200 damage. They hit nearby, they hit multiple times, they have their own knockdown conditions, so that's damage and control. Meteor is the perfect example of damage and control in one skill. Bed of Coals is just damage, but when combined with Meteor, it just like puts out crazy burn on everything that gets knocked down into it. So it's quite good. So like when you're evaluating these skills for like how good they are, especially if you're like theory crafting or trying out different builds or doing challenges, I highly recommend just buying a single campaign and just like running skills in that campaign with some mercenaries, one of each thing. It's been really fun. I highly recommend it. But when you're evaluating skills, you want to look at like what it brings to the table. So let's actually look at some fire magic skills and go over why they're good and why they're bad. Let me just kill these guys. So here you can see a big spike just from me. Like I did roughly a little bit over half their health. So we just vanquished this area, so that's cool. But let's evaluate some of these fire magic skills. So, all right. So let's go through each of these 16 just really quickly. So, Bed of Coals. This is what I'm looking at when I'm looking at fire magic. Cooldown 15 seconds, so that's decent. 27 fire damage each second for 5 seconds, so 150 damage, great. Hits adjacent, great. Casting time 1 second, great. Inflicts burn for 7 seconds on knockdown foes. Insane. Like, even without the burn, I would run this 100%. This is very good. The reason is it does 150 damage over time. You can use the scattering when you need it. You can knock down foes into it when you just want the damage. So it also doubles as like crowd control. So you can put it on like a caster that's being focused, and the enemies will scatter off them. It's a fantastic skill. It's definitely good to run. Breath of Fire causes 10 overcasts. That can be useful for Flare, which I'll go into in a second. Does 38 fire damage, so almost 40. Each second for 5 seconds. Hits foes adjacent. 5 energy, that's great. 2-second casting time, not the best, but it's decent. 10-second cooldown is phenomenal. This skill is super spammable. You can be at like no energy and just keep throwing these out in an extended fight if like your team's really hurting. So this is a great skill. Burning speed. This is a weird one. 10 energy and casts basically instantly. You move much faster. You burn for 7 seconds. When it ends, it inflicts burn on foes. So this is an example of a skill that's not that good because it costs a lot of energy. Yes, it increases your movement speed. Obviously, your monks will clear the burn off you, and then when it ends, it inflicts a long burn on adjacent. But the problem with it is that you can't re-up it and then it ends. It has to actually end. Like if you actually look this skill up, it has to literally end for it to inflict the burn. So you can't just spam it or just use it again. So that's why this skill is not good. So even though it can inflict 9 seconds of burn, which is no joke, it doesn't really bring damage to the table, and it's not really that good of a skill. Now there are use cases where it's okay and it can be used. Like obviously I could run it on the Starburst build to run up to enemies, but Death's Charge is just better because it just teleport to them, which is and it costs less. So okay, so Double Dragon. Enchants you and target ally. Adjacent foes take 28 fire damage each second. Skills that target a foe also inflict burning. This one is insane. Like I usually run this because if you run an enchants plus 20%, it lasts for 10 seconds because it's 9.6 rounded up to 10. So if you cast this on like a pet that's your pet, and then you just run up to a bunch of foes, you're dealing like 600 damage on adjacent between the two of you as long as it doesn't get removed because it is an enchantment. So this skill is insane. The cooldown's decent. It's spammable to a minor degree, but it's a good skill. I'm gonna skip utility skills. So Firestorm, same everything except for casting time as Double Dragon. 33 fire damage, 10-second duration. This skill is really good if you can keep enemies inside of it. It suffers if they flee, though, or if they scatter a lot. So it's a great skill, but it needs foes to be inside of it, like for the whole duration to get that 330 damage against 60 armor. But overall, it's decent. Fireball, 105 fire damage to target phone adjacent, low cooldown, spammable. This is a good skill, just on-demand damage. Flare, this skill is now phenomenal. 62 fire damage. No cooldown if overcast strike adjacent. So Breath of Fire and Flare are like BFF because Breath of Fire gets you your overcast and Flare can be spammed. So like they're taking 40s from this plus 60s from this. It's crazy. It's good damage. Immolate, this is a perfect example of a PvP skill. So when you're evaluating skills for PvE and you see something like this, you're like, oh wow, 71 fire damage, inflicts burn for 3 seconds. Oh my god, that's crazy. It's single target. It sucks. Sorry, it does. I don't know why people would ever run this in PvE. There's no reason to. It's bad. The reason it's bad is because for 10 energy, you can also hit, like, let's say there's like 5 foes that are adjacent to the target. You can hit 6 dudes for 105 damage, or you can hit 1 for 71 plus the 3-second burn. Which one's better? Obviously, Fireball. Flare, I would even argue Flare is better than Immolate, but just because it hits adjacent. If Immolate hit adjacent, it would be good. If Immolate hit adjacent, this shit would be really good, but it doesn't, so it sucks. I'd never run Immolate in PvE. It's a PvP skill. It's great in PvP. It's actually good in PvP. Inferno, 128 fire damage to adjacent. This is like the highest fire damage skill in the game. It's great. You can run it on Starburst builds. Lava arrows. Before Flare hit adjacent, this was just objectively better than Flare. Now that Flare hits adjacent, I would say Flare is just better than lava arrows. It shoots slower projectiles than Flare. It's not a bad skill. It hits nearby, which is nice. So it hits fewer foes than Flare, but at a larger radius. Now, in most situations in hard mode, foes will be kind of balled up, assuming you like pull correctly. So it can be debatable which is better, but I would say Flare is much better. Meteor. Knockdown, 105 damage, gives you Overcast. It's a great skill. It maintains Overcast, so instead of, if you just run this and nothing else, and you want your Flare to be hitting adjacent, just using Meteor once every 30 seconds will maintain Overcast, so great skill. Mind Burn, I would say, is actually bad. It looks good on paper, but the thing about it is its description is flawed. So if you have more energy than target foe, you deal basically 120 damage plus a long burn that also hits adjacent. Unfortunately, the way the skill actually works is each foe is checked for energy. So if you cast this on like a Necromancer and you have more energy than them, and there's an Ellie next to the Necro, hard mode Ellies have insane energy. You're never going to have higher energy than them. They have like 100-something energy. Good luck. It won't trigger on the Ellie, so it'll just trigger on each foe whose energy you have higher than. The reason this skill sucks is because you need to run super high energy, and it doesn't really bring enough to the table that makes it good. Like if it hit nearby, maybe, but the energy condition just makes it suck. Because in hard mode, enemy Mesmers, Necros, Writs have like 60 energy. So like if you're just at like half or low energy, it's just not going to be triggering on them, especially like Winds of Change stuff. So I wouldn't even run it. Smoldering Embers, this is another example of a PvP skill. 66 fire damage to target. If Overcast hexes them, deals 24 fire damage each second. This is a PvP skill for spikes. So this is not good in PvE. Fireball just hitting 3 enemies is better than this. Fireball hitting 2 enemies is better than this. Like, objectively, it's the exact same stats as Fireball. Fireball hitting more than 1 foe is just stronger than this. It just deals more damage in less time. Or, because like it takes, I don't know, 3 seconds to deal its full damage, so it deals like 150 damage. Fireball hitting 2 foes deals 200 damage, so, and Fireball can hit like 10 foes, so something to keep in mind. Starburst, great damage, great range, gives you, like, Starburst is insane. Tenai's Heat, the weird utility skill, causes health degen, weaken foes attack slower. It's not bad, but it's not a good damage skill. But like if you look at Fire Magic, most of the skills are quite good. If we look at, like right now I'm just evaluating damage skills, so like let's evaluate some skills in Earth Magic, because this is more cut and dry. Aftershock, my Earth Magic, actually let's go to Air Magic, because my Earth Magic's quite low. Whatever, we'll do Aftershock. Alright, so Aftershock, it deals good damage, it deals in, like, when you have actual investment in Earth Magic, it does really good damage. It does even more damage to knock down foes, hits nearby. This is a great skill. Low cooldown, pretty good. I could actually run this. I could run Earth instead of Air and run Aftershock, and it'd actually be quite strong. Ash Blast is a utility skill. It's not really good for damage, but it's good for utility. Churning Earth, damage and utility, great skill. Dragon Stomp. The problem with Dragon Stomp is it virtually costs you 35 energy. It takes 3 seconds to cast and it just costs so much energy. It's not a bad skill, but it just costs way too much energy. Knocking down nearby is insane on demand, especially with Earthbind. That's a 3-second knockdown. That's not bad at all. Obsidian Flame, I would say this is a PvP skill. 1.5 second casting time just to deal like roughly 100 armor ignoring damage when you actually have the investment on single target just isn't good. Single target damage just sucks. Stone Daggers sucks. It does. It doesn't deal area damage. It just hits one target, inflicts bleeding, does like 60-ish damage. Nothing too impressive. Stoning is okay. Knocks down weakened, but once again, single target damage. It's more suited for PvP. Tonight's crystals isn't bad. Can deal some damage. Apply cracked armor. It's okay. But if you evaluate skills and you look at what the skills do and like how they can benefit you, generally speaking, you want things that hit adjacent, nearby, or area, and you want them to deal good damage. And when they don't do that, they're quite terrible. Like every Mesmer Way skill, like I don't have all of them in this faction's only account, but let me like pull up some common Mesmer skills. So Overload. Inflicts a hex, some health degen. If they're using a skill, target foe and all adjacent, immediately take like 50 armor ignoring damage. This is a fantastic skill. And the reason why is instant and armor ignoring and adjacent. Same thing with Cry of Frustration. This is a phenomenal skill. Target foes using a skill, they're interrupted. All foes in the area interrupted, and they take about like 70 damage at good domination magic investment. So, shutdown, damage, area, great. What else is good? Energy Surge. Why is Energy Surge good? Roughly does like 90, like 81 to 90 armor ignoring damage. Hits nearby, so that's why that's good. What else do we have? Psychic Instability doesn't do damage, but interrupts nearby, or knocks down nearby, which is great. Mind Rack is okay in PvE. There's better things, like Shattered Illusions comes to mind. But when you're evaluating a skill, it basically comes down to this. Does it hit multiple foes? If it does, it's good. If it doesn't, it generally sucks. In the case of like a warrior build that actually is like running 100 blades, 100 blades is what gives you your AoE damage, so you can run like single target things that give like deep wound for spiking, and that's totally fine. But you generally want to evaluate skills like what does it bring to the table, how much damage does it deal, how good is it. Some death magic stuff is really good. So if I like go to death magic, example of a bad death magic skill, Bitter Chill. Why would you run this? 51 cold damage, recharges instantly if they have more health than you. So I'm going to be spamming 51 damage. That's objectively weaker than Flare. I mean, it hits instantly and there's no projectile, but it's just like bad damage. So this is an example of a bad skill. An example of a good skill, Death Nova. 50 or 85 armor ignoring damage and inflicts 15 seconds of poison on adjacent if target ally dies. And this Mesmer, if you put this skill on the Mesmer, will just constantly put Death Nova on things, on the minions, which will die and then trigger it. Example of an okay skill, Deathly Swarm, hits 3 dudes up to area range, not bad. Then a better skill, though, Putrid Explosion, explodes a corpse, 101 armor ignoring damage to foes near it. So once again, big damage nearby, good. Example of a bad skill, Rising Bile. End effect deals 5 to 6 damage, usually 6 if you have high death magic. For each second it was in effect, also damages other foe in the area. So this one almost looks good. It's like, 120 armor ignoring damage in area. Yeah, after 20 seconds. So, not really. It's slow. Like, that's its problem. It's way too slow. It's not like Destruction, the Writ Spirit. So if I go to like channeling magic, I go to Destruction. Destruction can hit its damage in like 8 seconds, and then you can pull it towards you and then nuke it for 150 area armor ignoring damage. This is good because 8 seconds is not that long of a delay, but 20 seconds is. Another good example of a damage skill, Ancestor's Rage. It does like 100 lightning damage to adjacent foes after 1 second. It casts instantly. But when you're evaluating damage skills, what you want to look for are, does it hit multiple foes? Does it deal good damage? Does it deal damage fast? Like, Starburst does all its damage right away plus the lingering burn. Tanai's Wind does all its damage right up front plus an interrupt. Inferno deals all its damage up front, and that's all it does, just does damage. Meteor does a bunch of damage, knocks dudes down. Like, when you're evaluating skills, you want to just look for how quickly it does damage, how it combos well with other things, and like how much damage it actually outputs. Perfect example of a skill that is deceptively weak is Searing Flames. Searing Flames applies 7 seconds of burn to nearby, and then if a foe is burning, it does 100 damage to them on the second time you cast it. So It's actually quite weak, so because for 30 energy, you get 7 seconds of burn and 100 damage, which is not that strong. And then you have to just keep spamming it, but it actually has quite poor damage output. So Searing Flames looks like it deals good damage, but as you're casting it, you're realizing, holy shit, 15 energy each cast is a lot, even with attunements, and I need to run Glowing Gaze, and then once you hit things with Glowing Gaze, you're no longer hitting like multiple foes, and you're just not dealing damage. Whereas if you were just running like Starburst or Double Dragon, or Savannah Heat, which is actually pretty good, you would just deal a shit ton of damage right out of the gate, which is better than like this weird maintained burn shit. But yeah, so Searing Flames is actually more of a utility than a damage skill for just like maintaining burn on nearby. But alright, so that's the end of the damage skill video. I hope it was useful to you. I'm going to be covering the 4 main types of skills in Guild Wars. So I just did utility and I just did damage, so I'll be doing control and then healing. So I'll see you in the next one.